Because it makes me ski. Apparently, after the 5th shot, I demand my skis. Where's my ski? I could barely stand. They put skis on me. They rented me skis. They bought me a ski suit. It was white. It didn't flatter me. I look like an avalanche from the top of the mountain. Why are they evacuating that village over there? Now, it was my first time skiing. So you'd think my first time, take me to the little slope, wee. Plus, I'm too drunk to stand. Let's not take them to the little slope. They took me up to Mount Son of a Bitch. And they threw me off that mountain. I didn't ski anything. I fell down a mountain. I don't even know where the skis went. I had to pay for the skis because I never found them. I went to the ski rental place. They said, "Where are the skis?" Up there. I fell down a mountain. I got to the bottom of the mountain, a lifeless wreck covered in snow. A little kid walks up to me crying. "Frosty's dead. Frosty's dead." Now other children are gathered round, and they're horrified. "Don't be dead, Frosty," they're saying. I had to get up. If I get up, these kids will believe in Santa till they're 27. There must have been some magic. Yay, Frosty! Open the ambulance door. Frosty's gonna need Percocets and a Pez dispenser. For when they placed it on his head, happy birthday. Water skiing I thought would be okay. Because it's water, it's soft. Nay, nay. Not at 40 miles an hour, it's like cement.
Good morning. It is Tuesday, Ayn Rand Tuesday, and happy 4th of July, July 4th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have No Free Lunch, The Rape of the Mind, Larry Elder, James Woods, Senator Tim Scott, Loren Boebert, Governor Abbott, and Part 2 of Chapter 7 of Ayn Rand's book, Philosophy, Who Needs It? All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
The anthem will be followed by a flyover of F-16 jets from the 56th Tactical Training Wing at MacDill Air Force Base, and will be performed by the Florida Orchestra under the direction of Maestro Yaha Ling, and sung by Grammy Award winner Whitney Houston.
At the
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
The more information that's out there, the greater the returns to just being willing to sit down and apply yourself. Information isn't what's scarce. It's the willingness to do something with it. Tyler Cowen. This is the heart of economics as human action. No information or gathering of information is worth a hill of beans apart from the human action brought to the information. Tenacity, creativity, and initiative create wealth. Information is as abundant as sand.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. So who is the true conservative? He is the person that has the courage of his convictions and is confident in what he knows. He is the person that understands that culture trumps politics. He's not selfish, but minds his own business. He does not go looking for trouble. He is alert. He curbs his curiosity, and he acts like an adult. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He is judgmental and moralizes. He refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why, rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American, and he is better than the socialist. He's a better friend, father, brother, family member, and a better person, period. You have to know that being a true conservative is best, or you are wasting your time. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservatives' suggested federal political priorities? Number 1, recognize that the government has no rights. 2, defund Planned Parenthood. 3, replace the Affordable Care Act. 4, institute zero-based budgeting. 5, prohibit collective bargaining for all public employees. 6, assign criminal and civil liabilities to all government regulators. 7, immediately repeal the Patriot Act. 8, immediately repeal all emergency dictator laws. 9, reinstate writs of outlawry. 10, use taxpayer funds to sponsor recalls, ballot initiatives, and referendums. 11, create a flexible minimum wage. 12, means test health care. 13, immediately and permanently prohibit investment banking by any office holder. And 14, make nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons obsolete. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservative cultural priorities? Bring back hierarchy. Bring back the admiration of intelligence, morality, and beauty. Bring back single-income households, integration, parenting, the primacy of existence, certainty of knowledge, and universal rights and wrongs. Bring back principled behavior, masculinity and femininity. Bring back Adam 12, John F. Kennedy, the gold standard, pre-HMO medical care, and nonprofit news. Bring back civil service, the term stupid question, arguments and fights, the cultural influence of the church and the Boy Scouts. Bring back the influence of social organizations such as the Lions Club and the Rotary Club. Bring back bowling. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a tweet by Larry Elder. So many Americans are fighting for the ideals of July 4th, 1776 every single day. God bless America and the courageous men who founded it. And again, that was a tweet from Larry Elder. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a tweet from James Woods. The Declaration of Independence is adopted. On this day in history, July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence is adopted. Congress had voted unanimously 2 days before to sever all ties with Great Britain. The discrepancy in dates causes some confusion. The actual date of the decision to break from Great Britain was July 2nd, but the language of Congress's public announcement was adopted on July 4th. Tensions with Great Britain had been increasing for years, and many colonists were hoping to reconcile with their mother country. After the American Revolution raged for a year, however, enough citizens began to see that reconciliation was impossible, and this meant that a vote for independence in Congress could actually succeed. On June 7, 1776, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia presented the Lee Resolution to Congress, calling for a Declaration of Independence, the creation of foreign alliances, and the Confederation of the 13 colonies. Congress immediately appointed a committee to prepare such a declaration, but tabled the vote until July 2nd. The Committee of Five, consisting of Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston, was tasked with writing the Declaration. Thomas Jefferson wrote most of the document with input from the others. The committee presented their document to Congress on June 28th, but it was tabled for a few days. On July 2nd, the full Congress assembled, and 12 of the 13 colonies represented voted for independence, with New York abstaining. After the vote, Congress debated and revised the committee's declaration and adopted it in its final version on July 4th. On the evening of July 4th, about 200 copies of the Declaration of Independence were printed by printer John Dunlap. These copies were sent around the country and read in various places and published in newspapers. The first public readings occurred in Philadelphia, in Easton, Pennsylvania, and in Trenton, New Jersey on July 8th. George Washington had the Declaration read to the Continental Army in New York City on the 9th. The first declaration did not have the signatures of the 56 signers. Instead, most of these were added to a parchment copy on August 2nd. Others who were not present signed at later dates. In January 1777, Congress had more copies printed by Mary Catherine Goddard in Baltimore, this time with the signatures included. This was the first time the world learned of who had signed the document. Many of the signers suffered great personal harm during the war as a result of their loyalties to the American cause. Some, such as Thomas Jefferson, Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and Benjamin Franklin, went on to become political leaders of the new United States and eventually became heroic and iconic figures of American history. And that was James Woods on Twitter. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
Part 1. The Techniques of Individual Submission. The first part of this book is devoted to various techniques used to make man a meek conformist. In addition to actual political occurrences, attention is called to some of the ideas born in the laboratory and to the drug techniques that facilitate brainwashing. The last chapter deals with the subtle psychological mechanisms of mental submission. Chapter 1. You too would confess. The fantastic thing is happening in our world. Today, a man is no longer punished only for the crimes he has in fact committed. Now, he may be compelled to confess to crimes that may have been conjured up by his judges, who use his confession for political purposes. It is not enough for us to damn as evil those who sit in judgment. We must understand what impels the false admission of guilt. We must take another look at the human mind in all its frailty and vulnerability. The enforced confession. During the Korean War, an officer of the United States Marine Corps, Colonel Frank H. Schwabel, was taken prisoner by the Chinese communists. After months of intense psychological pressure and physical degradation, he signed a well-documented confession that the United States was carrying on bacteriological warfare against the enemy. The confession named names, cited missions, described meetings and strategy conferences. This was a tremendously valuable propaganda tool for the totalitarians. They cabled the news all over the world. The United States of America is fighting a peace-loving people of China by dropping bombs loaded with disease-spreading bacteria in violation of international law. After his repatriation, Colonel Schwabel issued a sworn statement repudiating his confession and describing his long months of imprisonment. Later, he was brought before a military court of inquiry. He testified in his own defense before the court. I was never conceived in my own mind that we in the 1st Marine Air Wing had used bug warfare. I knew we hadn't, but the rest of it was real to me. The conferences, the planes, and how they would go about their missions. The words were mine, the colonel continued, but the thoughts were theirs. That's the hardest thing I have to explain. How a man can sit down and write something he knows is false, and yet to sense it, to feel it, to make it seem real. This is the way Dr. Charles W. Mayo, a leading American physician and government representative, explained brainwashing in an official statement before the United Nations. The tortures used, although they include many brutal physical injuries, are not like the medieval torture of the rack and thumbscrew. They are subtler, more prolonged, and intended to be more terrible in their effect. They are calculated to disintegrate the mind of an intelligent victim, to distort his sense of values, to a point where he will not simply cry out, "I did it," but will become a seemingly willing accomplice to the complete disintegration of his integrity and the production of an elaborate fiction. The Schwabel case is but one example of a defenseless prisoner being compelled to tell a big lie. If we were to survive as free men, we must face up to this problem of politically inspired mental coercion, with all its ramifications. It is more than 20 years since psychologists first began to suspect that the human mind can easily fall prey to dictatorial powers. In 1933, the German Reichstag building was burned to the ground. The Nazis arrested a Dutchman, Marinus van der Lubbe, and accused him of the crime. Van der Lubbe was known by Dutch psychiatrists to be mentally unstable. He had been a patient in a mental institution in Holland, and his weakness and lack of mental balance became apparent to the world when he appeared before the court. Wherever news of the trial reached, men wondered, can that foolish little fellow be a heroic revolutionary? A man who is willing to sacrifice his life to an ideal? During the court sessions, van der Lubbe was evasive, dull, and apathetic. Yet the reports of the Dutch psychiatrists described him as a gay, alert, unstable character, a man whose moods changed rapidly, who liked to vagabond around, and who had all kinds of fantasies about changing the world. Over the 42nd day of the trial, van der Lubbe's behavior changed dramatically. His apathy disappeared. It became apparent that he had been quite aware of everything that had gone on during the previous sessions. He criticized the slow course of the procedure. He demanded punishment, either by imprisonment or death. He spoke about his inner voices. He insisted that he had his moods in check. Then he fell back into apathy. We now recognize these symptoms as a combination of behavior forms, which we can call a confession syndrome. In 1933, this type of behavior was unknown to psychiatrists. Unfortunately, it is very familiar today and is frequently met in cases of extreme mental coercion. Van der Lubbe was subsequently convicted and executed. When the trial was over, the world began to realize that he had merely been a scapegoat. The Nazis themselves had burned down the Reichstag building and had staged the crime on the trial so that they could take over Germany. Still later, we realized that van der Lubbe was the victim of a diabolically clever misuse of medical knowledge and psychological technique, through which he had been transformed into a useful, passive, meek automaton who replied merely yes or no to his interrogators during most of the court sessions. In a few moments, he threatened to jump out of his enforced role. Even at the time, there were rumors that the man had been drugged into submission, though we never became sure of that. Between 1936 and 1938, the world became more conscious of the very real danger of systematized mental coercion in the field of politics. This was the period of the well-remembered Moscow Purge trials. It was almost impossible to believe that the dedicated old Bolsheviks who had given their times to a revolutionary movement had suddenly turned into dastardly traitors. When, one after another, every one of the accused confessed and beat his breast, the general reaction was that this was a great show of deception, intended only as a propaganda move for the non-communist world. Then it became apparent that a more worse tragedy was being enacted. The men on trial had once been human beings. Now they were being systematically changed into puppets. The puppeteers called the tune, manipulated their actions. When, from time to time, news came through showing how hard, rigid revolutionaries could be changed into meek, self-accusing sheep all over the world, the last remnants of the belief in the free community, presumably being built in Soviet Russia, began to crumble. In recent years, the spectacle of confession to uncommitted crimes has become more and more common. The list ranges from communist through non-communist to anti-communist, and includes men of such different types as the Czech Bolshevik Rudolf Slansky and the Hungarian Cardinal Joseph Mindszenty.
And that was the enforced confession from The Rape of the Mind. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Senator Tim Scott.
My favorite 4th of July tradition is hanging out with my family. One of the blessings of being an American is, we've won the lottery of citizenship. American citizenship is the top of the food chain. Number 2, having the opportunity to spend time with my mother, my family is a blessing from God and a blessing from country. And number 3, we get to eat good, especially at the tomahawk. We're going to eat good today.
And that was Senator Tim Scott. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, a tweet from Loren Boebert. Wishing everyone a truly beautiful day, celebrating the 247th birthday of our great nation. On this day, remember the incredible sacrifice our founders made, and remember that we are always just one tyrant away from losing all our freedoms. We can never let that happen. And that was Loren Boebert. Back in a minute. Thank you. And again, Senator Tim Scott.
I'm Tim Scott, and I want to wish you a happy 4th of July. We are blessed to live in the greatest nation on God's green earth. Our founding fathers were geniuses who should be celebrated, not canceled. Only in America could the son of a single mother rise from poverty to become a candidate for president. America is the land of opportunity, not a land of oppression. I know it because I've lived it. To the patriots who fought on the battlefield for freedom, I say thank you. God bless our United States of America, and happy Independence Day.
And that was Senator Tim Scott. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, a tweet from Governor Greg-Abbott. Happy 4th of July. The courageous actions of a few brave founding fathers 247 years ago brought forth the liberty and opportunity we enjoy today. Today, we celebrate their legacy and honor all who have fought to keep America the greatest force for freedom in history. And that was Governor Greg-Abbott. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, part 2 of Chapter 7 of Philosophy Who Needs It by Ayn Rand.
Non-sensory, non-rational, non-definable, non-identifiable means of knowledge, such as instinct, intuition, revelation, or any form of just knowing. Reason is the perception of reality and rests on a single axiom, the law of identity. Mysticism is the claim to the perception of some other reality, other than the one in which we live, whose definition is only that it is not natural, it is supernatural, and it is to be perceived by some form of unnatural or supernatural means. You realize, of course, that epistemology, the theory of knowledge, is the most complex branch of philosophy, which cannot be covered exhaustively in a single lecture, so I will not attempt to cover it. I will say only that those who wish a fuller discussion will find it in Atlas Shrugged. For the purposes of tonight's discussion, the definitions I have given you contain the essence of the issue, regardless of whose theory, argument, or philosophy you choose to accept. I will repeat. Reason is the faculty which perceives, identifies, and integrates the material provided by man's senses. Mysticism is the claim to a non-sensory means of knowledge. In Western civilization,
The period ruled by mysticism is known as the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages. I will assume that you know the nature of that period and the state of human existence in those ages. The Renaissance broke the rule of the mystics. Renaissance means rebirth. Few people today will care to remind you that it was a rebirth of reason, of man's mind. In the light of what followed, most particularly in the light of the Industrial Revolution, nobody can now take faith or religion or revelation or any form of mysticism as his basic and exclusive guide to existence. Not in the way it was taken in the Middle Ages. This does not mean that the Renaissance has automatically converted everybody to rationality. Far from it. It means only that so long as a single automobile, a single skyscraper, or a single copy of Aristotle's logic remains in existence, nobody will be able to arouse men's hope, eagerness, and joyous enthusiasm by telling them to ditch their mind and rely on mystic faith. This is why I said that mysticism as a cultural power is dead. Observe that in the attempts at a mystic revival today, it is not an appeal to life, hope, and joy that the mystics are making, but an appeal to fear, doom, and despair. Give up. Your mind is impotent. Life is only a foxhole. Is not a motto that can revive a culture. Now, if you ask me to name the man most responsible for the present state of the world, the man whose influence has almost succeeded in destroying the achievements of the Renaissance, I will name Immanuel Kant. He was the philosopher who saved the morality of altruism, and who knew that what it had to be saved from was reason. This is not a mere hypothesis. It is a known historical fact that Kant's interest and purpose in philosophy was to save the morality of altruism, which could not survive without a mystic base. His metaphysics and his epistemology were devised for that purpose. He did not, of course, announce himself as a mystic. Few of them have, since the Renaissance. He announced himself as a champion of reason, of pure reason. There are two ways to destroy the power of a concept. One, by an open attack in open discussion. The other, by subversion from the inside. That is, by subverting the meaning of the concept, setting up a straw man and then refuting it. Kant did the second. He could not attack reason. He merely constructed such a version of what is reason that it made mysticism look like plain rational common sense by comparison. He did not deny the validity of reason. He merely claimed that reason is limited, that it leads us to impossible contradictions, that everything we perceive is an illusion, and that we can never perceive reality or things as they are. He claimed, in effect, that the things we perceive are not real because we perceive them. A straw man is an odd metaphor to apply to such an enormous, cumbersome, ponderous construction as Kant's system of epistemology. Nevertheless, a straw man is what it was. And the doubts, the uncertainty, the skepticism that followed, skepticism about man's ability ever to know anything, were not, in fact, applicable to human consciousness. Because it was not a human consciousness that Kant's robot represented. But philosophers accepted it as such. And while they cried that reason had been invalidated, they did not notice that reason had been pushed off the philosophical scene altogether, and that the faculty they were arguing about was not reason. No, Kant did not destroy reason. He merely did as thorough a job of undercutting as anyone could ever do. If you trace the roots of all our current philosophies, such as pragmatism, logical positivism, and all the rest of the neo-mystics who announce happily that you cannot prove that you exist, you will find that they all grew out of Kant. As to Kant's version of the altruist morality, he claimed that it was derived from pure reason, not from revelation, except that it rested on a special instinct for duty, a categorical imperative which one just knows. His version of morality makes the Christian one sound like a healthy, cheerful, benevolent code of selfishness. Christianity merely told man to love his neighbor as himself. That's not exactly rational, but at least it does not forbid man to love himself. What Kant propounded was full, total, abject selflessness. He held that an action is moral only if you perform it out of a sense of duty and derive no benefit from it of any kind, neither material nor spiritual. If you derive any benefit, your action is not moral any longer. This is the ultimate form of demanding that man turn himself into a shmoo, the mystic little animal of the Lil Abner comic strip that went around seeking to be eaten by somebody. It is Kant's version of altruism that is generally accepted today. Not practiced, who can practice it, but guiltily accepted. It is Kant's version of altruism that people who have never heard of Kant profess when they equate self-interest with evil. It is Kant's version of altruism that's working whenever people are afraid to admit the pursuit of any personal pleasure or gain or motive, whenever men are afraid to confess that they are seeking their own happiness, whenever businessmen are afraid to say that they are making profits, whenever the victims of an advancing dictatorship are afraid to assert their selfish rights. The ultimate monument to Kant and to the whole altruist morality is Soviet Russia. If you want to prove to yourself the power of ideas and particularly of morality, the intellectual history of the 19th century would be a good example to study. The greatest, unprecedented, undreamed of events and achievements were taking place before men's eyes, but men did not see them and did not understand their meaning, as they do not understand it to this day. I am speaking of the Industrial Revolution, of the United States, and of capitalism. For the first time in history, men gained control over physical nature and threw off the control of men over men. That is, men discovered science and political freedom. The creative energy, the abundance, the wealth, the rising standard of living for every level of the population were such that the 19th century looks like a fiction utopia, like a blinding burst of sunlight in the drab progression of most of human history. If life on Earth is one standard of value, then the 19th century moved mankind forward more than all the other centuries combined. Did anyone appreciate it? Does anyone appreciate it now? Has anyone identified the causes of that historical miracle? They did not and have not. What blinded them? The morality of altruism. Let me explain this. There are, fundamentally, only two causes of the progress of the 19th century. The same two causes which you will find at the root of any happy, benevolent, progressive era in human history. One cause is psychological, the other existential, or one pertains to man's consciousness, the other to the physical conditions of his existence. The first is reason, the second is freedom. And when I say freedom, I do not mean poetic sloppiness, such as freedom from want or freedom from fear or freedom from the necessity of earning a living. I mean freedom from compulsion, freedom from rule by physical force, which means political freedom. These two, reason and freedom, are corollaries, and their relationship is reciprocal. When men are rational, freedom wins. When men are free, reason wins. Their antagonists are faith and force. These also are corollaries. Every period of history dominated by mysticism was a period of statism, of dictatorship, of tyranny. Look at the Middle Ages, and look at the political systems of today. The 19th century was the ultimate product and expression of the intellectual trend of the Renaissance and the Age of Reason. which means of a predominantly Aristotelian philosophy. And for the first time in history, it created a new economic system, the necessary corollary of political freedom, a system of free trade on a free market, capitalism. No, it was not a full, perfect, unregulated, totally laissez-faire capitalism, as it should have been. Various degrees of government interference and control still remain, even in America. And this is what led to the eventual destruction of capitalism. But the extent to which certain countries were free was the exact extent of their economic progress. America, the freest, achieved the most. Never mind the low wages and the harsh living conditions of the early years of capitalism. They were all that the national economies at the time could afford. Capitalism did not create poverty. It inherited it. Compared to the centuries of pre-capitalist starvation, the living conditions of the poor in the early years of capitalism were the first chance the poor had ever had to survive. As proof, the enormous growth of the European population during the 19th century, a growth of over 300%, as compared to the previous growth of something like 3% per century. Now, why is this not appreciated? Why did capitalism, the truly magnificent benefactor of mankind, arouse nothing but resentment, denunciations, and hatred, then and now? Why did the so-called defenders of capitalism keep apologizing for it, then and now? Because, ladies and gentlemen, capitalism and altruism are incompatible. Make no mistake about it. And tell it to your Republican friends, capitalism and altruism cannot coexist in the same man or in the same society. Tell it to anyone who attempts to justify capitalism on the ground of the public good, or the general welfare, or service to society, or the benefit it brings to the poor. All these things are true, but they are the byproducts, the secondary consequences of capitalism, not its goal, purpose, or moral justification. The moral justification of capitalism is man's right to exist for his own sake, neither sacrificing himself to others, nor sacrificing others to himself. It is the recognition that man, every man, is an end in himself, not a means to the ends of others, not a sacrificial animal serving anyone's need. This is implicit in the function of capitalism, but until now, it has never been stated explicitly, in moral terms. Why not? Because this is the base of a morality diametrically opposed to the morality of altruism, which, to this day, people are afraid to challenge.
And that was the part 2 of Chapter 7 of Philosophy Who Needs It by Ayn Rand. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.